Behind the Shades.
Since the passing of your daughter, have you noticed any changes after that in regards to maybe your behavior or how you operate in the world going forward?
Um, you know, I always knew, like we all know that our time here isn't forever, but especially in your youth, you're like, I got forever, nothing's gonna happen to me. I remember I had a friend and his dad, he would always like do like these house gatherings. And so his dad would do a lot of cooking. And I remember he was telling us one time, he's like, heck, Maya, I was 30 before I even knew I could die. And so I just kind of laughed, we laughed at the time and he knew, but it's just kind of like living on the edge. Nothing's going to happen to me. I'm young, I'll be here forever. And, I think post 2020, everyone's realized like anything can happen at any point. And now you hear about young people dropping down left and right. So I think just the reality of you're not guaranteed to get old. Like you really just don't know. So every moment that you have, make sure that you're capitalizing on it because there really may not be a tomorrow.
That's an excellent point that you made because I know in my 20s, I felt like I was Superman. I felt
Yeah.
absolutely invincible. I used to eat nonsense, burgers, fries. Um, geez, what else? I can't even, I think that's when I ate meat. Now I don't eat meat anymore. I used to be a vegan. Now I'm a pescatarian, but
Uh-huh.
you feel like you can do whatever it is you want. I remember going
Yeah.
to clubs until like 3 o'clock in the morning, have clothes in my trunk, find somewhere to shower, put the clothes on, and go back. Like sleep was, you didn't even need sleep.
Yeah.
Now I'm taking a nap after this.
What a
Like,
time.
right? Like it's, did your life change in that way where when you look back, it's like this drastic change where when sometimes you look in the mirror and you're like, is that me? Am I the same person? Are you having those types of moments now?
Um, it's just kind of sometimes it's like, man, I can't believe something so crazy happened because as we talked about before, I never had a loss so close. And I would say before, I feel like I had a good life. Like things are just good. And it's one of those things that it's like you see on TV. It's kind of like you see the things happening. You're like, oh, I never met anyone that this really happened to, or like, that's terrible. But, that's just the people on TV. But it's just kind of like, no, this is you. And so it just, it just makes things real. Like I just can't believe sometimes that this is the plot twist, so to speak.
How real was it for you and your family when you're looking for that support system to navigate? Because you mentioned the therapy, right? And I think therapy is really important because it allows you to talk to someone that, for the most part, is like impartial. They're not biased either
Yeah.
way. Um, but did you have a support system outside of that therapist that was there for you to help you and everyone go through it, or at least to talk about what you guys are going through?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely had family around, my husband, friends. Support was great. Um, I still think though, people they didn't know, like no one could really walk you through it because it's an experience they didn't have, but they were very supportive and showed up and still continue to show up for me. And that's all you really can do. As I said, with grief and especially with loss, you learn how much you really have control over. And so the individuals in your life, they can't fix it, but they can be there for you. They can support you and just let you know like they care. And I definitely have that support system and still do for sure.
I want to double back to your podcast because I know you mentioned that you have some fantastic guests that share their journey of loss and grief and things of that nature. What's some of the commonalities that you find between your guests that they share when you're interviewing them?
Probably one of the most common things has been because I typically ask when I'm specifically talking about grief, like, what can other individuals in your life that care about you do to support you through this? If they didn't do it, what do you wish they would have done? And it's just to be there because we all, know they can't fix it, they can't do anything, but just be there, and the importance of other people showing up for you. When you first have a loss, everyone's there, like everyone's around, like, are you okay? You're just like, it's the blanket of covering. But as life continues to go on, which people have every right to continue to go on with their life, you are still forever dealing with the grief. And so you go through periods of like, I want to talk about it. It's been like a year, but I don't want to bring it up and burden other people because I feel like they're gonna, it's gonna drain the room, that type of thing. Just continuing to be there. So that's a common thing that I've definitely heard for sure. And one thing that I've heard that's been really surprising to me is even people who don't solidly say that they have a faith believe that their child is somewhere looking at them or waiting for them somewhere, which I thought was interesting.
Ooh, that's a good point because it's one thing to visit the cemetery because that's
Yeah.
where the body for most people, right? Unless you get it
Yeah.
cremated. Um, but a lot of people who may or may not believe in God or something else, they feel the presence of that person has passed on, right? So they
Yeah.
maybe subconsciously believe that the child is somewhere, the person is somewhere. Do you dive into that and try to explore that aspect of it? Because that's at least very interesting to me.
You know, um, I haven't, to answer your question, for several reasons. I feel like I'm not properly equipped to walk someone through a topic so heavy. Like, I don't want to peel that much back and not be able to offer support because I feel like that's a lot and I don't know what to tell you. But I just found it interesting because they would say, like, this is what I have to tell myself to keep moving, or that fight or flight kicks in, whatever you got to tell yourself to keep yourself alive. And they're like, this is just what I have to tell myself. I have to think that they're somewhere so I can just go another day. So I haven't personally dug into it, but I just found it interesting. But then I don't want to turn around and, like, we're already down and be like, but you said you don't believe in the Lord. So what you talking about? So just let it go. But it's just something that I found interesting for sure.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to put them
Yeah.
on the
See that?
spot like that, right? Because then
Like, what are you
who
going to do after
knows?
that?
Yeah, interview over, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then they feel
Okay, but
worse. Yeah.
I know. Like it's like, oh my goodness, she kind of exposed me there a little bit. But
Yeah.
with grief, it comes in so many different forms, and you can experience it: job loss, child loss, parent
Yeah.
loss, right? Loss of a relationship. I think that's probably the one people identify grief with most, I would say.
Mhm.
Like a breakup or divorce or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Um, because we can experience grief in so many different forms and we just don't know it until we look back and we see a change in our life,
Yeah.
right? Like, for example, look at the lockdowns, and a lot of people lost a lot of things. And you could make an argument that they're suffering grief for some of the things that they lost: the social aspect, some lost
Yeah.
jobs, some lost family members, and they weren't able to identify it because maybe it was their first time going through it.
Yeah.
What are some of the ways that you identified your grief and the grieving process as you were going through it?
So that's one of the things that I've talked about several times on the platform is the fact that, while my grief is a different experience, we've all grieved in some way. Like you said, you lose a friend, a job or something, but we're all losing things at different points in our life. Um, and so I think it was more blatant for me to recognize grief because it was a loss of a living person versus you losing a job or something else, or even losing, the life that you thought you may have. Like you thought you were going to be a medical doctor and you end up being a scientist. Like you still kind of grieve like, oh man, I kind of put my stock into that and things change. So I think that would be a little bit of a different aspect. But for me, it was just kind of, right in your face. But again, as you mentioned, we grieve things all the time. And I found it, I don't know if I say odd, but it was just interesting to me that we are all grieving different things, but it's something that we don't necessarily learn how to do or how to process. And so I was like, man, I'm not equipped for this, but I should have been, So it's just like, with you're guaranteed to be grieving something at some point is my thing. And so I feel like, geez, it would be nice if you knew a little bit more about this and how to do it properly, because you're going to do it at some point.